today, and we look forward to even hearing some of your wisdoms and your memories of these two stalwarts. But most importantly, let me welcome you, friends, comrades, and lastly but not least, our partner, the Mandela Foundation, as led by my comrade in arms, Sello Hatang, who, by the way, I need to declare he's my homeboy. We come from small villages of the Northwest and never knew that one day we would meet on platforms of this nature, and we're quite proud of what the Northwest has managed to produce over its many small years. We really thank you for joining us, because tonight is a really special night for us, and it is jointly hosted by the Tambo Foundation as well as the Mandela Foundation. It is a special night because we present tonight as a platform from which we want to celebrate Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela, who are the two liberation struggle leaders who lived their lives to the fullest, as we all can remember, and left us an indelible mark on our collective national memory. And it is that collective national memory that we want to reawaken today, because we believe that today South Africa needs some of that memory most if we are to continue to achieve the dream that they helped us build. To this day, Tambo and Mandela remain a great source of inspiration to all South Africans, and it is for that reason that we hope and look forward to your unreserved contribution to helping South Africa map its future. As we all know, Tambo and Mandela met in their early years at the University of Fort Hare. That's where they first met as young activists and formed a bond that lasted throughout their lives. Theirs was a relationship that was so exemplary that it helped carry them through many years of tribulations and trials and happy moments. They were not only comrades in arms, but they became even family friends that even were transferred into their families. When some of their children needed to marry, they would, rather than talk to their own immediate parents, go to the other parent to seek guidance and seek permission. And it is only when the other parent said, yes, I agree, that the child will go back to their biological father. That's how deep the relationship was. And it is that relationship that we believe that we should never forget as South Africans. I think we have been blessed, and I think we are a generation that is very lucky that today we are still alive today to be able to remember that legacy, but most importantly also celebrate this unbelievable moment in our history. Some of you would still remember that this year marks a very exciting year for the Tambo Foundation, because had Oliver still lived, this is the year in which he would have been turning 100 years old. We cannot forget the sacrifices that he made for us. But more excitingly so, next year, around the same month, it is the year that the Mandela Foundation would be celebrating Madiba's centenary. So I think their fate was written in the stars. They had to both be born from rural Eastern Cape. They both came from very poor backgrounds, and both cherished education and the love for humanity, and that carried them throughout all the things that they did in their lives. So it is no small accident that today the two foundations have agreed that in marking these amazing centenaries, that we will continue to collaborate and work together selflessly to create a platform from which South Africans can access this rich legacy of the two giants that ever crossed our paths. We will not only stop as working between the Mandela and the Tambo Foundation, but we will continue to reach out and work with other foundations. Watch the space. There's some exciting initiatives coming this year that we're collaborating with the Mbeki Foundation, and they too will be the epitome of showcasing to South Africa the rich legacy that we have. But for us, in concluding this piece, I think it is one thing to remember and celebrate their legacies. But what is most important for us is what each and every one of us will do as they leave this platform today and many other platforms to come. It is, what are you going to do? As a South African who has been so motivated by these selfless leaders, that you too can do better, if not more, than what they did. We cannot do less. because if we do less, I think we would be doing an injustice to the sacrifices that they made for all of us to have been here today. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this conversation, and I'm very excited that I'm handing you over to the most capable hands of none other than Iman Rapeti in person. So welcome Iman as she takes us through this session.
Thank you so much, Mum Linda. I appreciate that. I have one thing to say, is that my heart, can you all hear me? My heart is racing so much because, number one, I didn't know it was going to be on television, man. And the other thing is because these conversations are not meant to be a dusting off of history. It's not meant to be nostalgic and romantic because that doesn't take us very far. For me, for the next hour and a half that we have these amazing repositories of wisdom, history, and experience with us, we're almost going to re-invoke their spirit. So for me, for the next hour and a half, this is hallowed ground. This is sacred territory. But it's not too sacred that you can't say what you need to say. And that's why I'm so grateful for the role that I can play tonight, because I'm literally going to be like I'm at Wimbledon. I want to give you the lion's share of the time to have your input, to have your questions asked. I'm going to use Greta Montashe's words, robust is what we're looking for. And so, because otherwise we're not going to get very far. But I want to begin, before I introduce our panelists, and again, I'm starstruck because we have them here. We can touch them and we can feel them, and that's really amazing. So thank you so much. I want to start with taking you back to a Sunday in May in 1993. It was actually the 2nd of May. Nelson Mandela had the heavy task of standing in front of the mortal remains of his friend and comrade Oliver Tambo to pay tribute and respect. And he said thus, "A great giant who strode the globe like a colossus has fallen. A mind whose thoughts have opened the doors to our liberty has ceased to function. A heart whose dreams gave hope to the despised has forever lost its beat. The gentle voice whose measured words of reason shook the thrones of tyrants has been silenced. Peoples of the world, here lies before you the body of a man who was tied to me by an umbilical cord which cannot be broken. We say he is departed, but can we allow him to depart while we live? Can we say Oliver Tambo is no more while we walk the solid earth? Can we allow him to depart while we live? Can we allow Madiba to depart while we live? That question stares down, I think, at all of us tonight as we gather in answering it, because the reason we're here today is not for the potential vanity of celebrating a birthday, for solidifying history and legacy, because the question we're asking is, will romance and nostalgia move us 1 inch forward from where we stand in our individual lives here tonight? Will it put food on a bare table, secure the roofing on a shaky house, give young people a reason to wake up in the morning? I don't think so. Do you think so? I don't think so. We're here to use their experiences, their lives, their flaws, their humanity, as they were, as a checker, a reminder, a teacher, and the catalyst that will allow us to move forward, putting history in front of us to allow us to write a future that we decide. So I'm very excited. So our panel tonight, I'm struggling with this one because they're all older than we are, so we can't do it in the Western way, Mr. Maharaj and Miss Mabuza and Miss Kalanikos. My friend was telling me on an interview I did recently that they referred to, okay, let me test you on this. Who is the Makulu Bay? Any takers? Apparently it's our Chief Justice, Mogoeng, is the Makulu Bay. Or Ubabes Welo, Ubabe Welo, I'm told. Uncle Mac, I wonder then, will he be Ubay We Comrade or Comrade Bay? Are you happy with that?
I thought in the fashion of present-day South Africa you would say, His Excellency.
Oh! Okay, so let's get on with it. Let me introduce, I don't think I really need to do a lengthy introduction, but I want to tell you a little bit about them in case you didn't know before you came tonight. After the elections in '94, Uncle Mac Maharaj was appointed to the cabinet. He served as the Minister of Transport until the elections in 1999. He resigned from active politics in 1999, but was later appointed as President Jacob Zuma's spokesperson. He's active now in the business world, I'm told. Mamlindiwe Mabuza is a poet who served as the African National Congress's chief representative to Sweden and the US, also as the South African ambassador to Germany. And she garnered international support for the liberation struggle in South Africa. She was working very hard on economic sanctions and cultural boycotts. As a writer, she has used her skill and the written word to take part in multiple collectives meant to empower South African women, specifically writers such as Molibengwe, writing such as Malibongwe and One Never Knows. Lily Kalinikos, Auntie Lily, that's what you asked me to call her. Well known for her work on the formation of the South African working class, and there's a trilogy of books that she has released, namely Golden Workers, Working Life, Factories, Townships, and Popular Culture. It won the Noma Award for Publishing in Africa. In 1992, she was commissioned to write Oliver Tambo's biography, and it was published as Oliver Tambo, Beyond the Ngele Mountain. So please, a rousing welcome to our panelists tonight. And I think in the interest of efficiency, because we have so little time, we're not going to spend a lot of time scene setting and so on. We're really going to go to the heart of what we're dealing with today. Leadership is a massive question. I know that, by the way, trying to manage all three of them in the anteroom was difficult. I'm hoping they're going to bring that same energy and drive. Uncle Max said that he needed boxing gloves. Do you still? He's brought those and packed those along. So really, I want a pacey, popcorn-like discussion, if we can, to take as much out of the three of you as we can and open the floor to as many questions as possible. So let's do that. Oliver Tambo led the party at a time, we'll say in retrospect, when the ANC was almost like a sweater that was not quite knit. Its pieces were spread all over the continent. People were in camps, he was in exile, and the camps all over the continent were under attack. And this was an everyday thing. Madiba taking over when we got our freedom, consolidating the party then into a governing structure. In a sense, we think in South Africa that they formed the gold standard of leadership. What were their leadership attributes, from your point of view, Lily, that really guided them and shaped them in their work and brought that responsibility that they had to oversee together?
Well, I think that what they had in common was a mixture of traditions in leadership style. And that included traditional consensus collective decision-making, which OR perhaps exemplified more than Madiba did. Madiba was naturally quite an authoritative figure, whereas OR would spend hours listening carefully. He would be the last person to speak after a long, making sure that everyone's opinions were sought out. And that's quite interesting, because the ANC was supposed to very often make decisions according to the method of the SACP, which was democratic centralism. But oddly enough, the nearly 200 people that I interviewed, they all said that never once did they have to take a vote. It was by consensus, but the chairperson, OR, would include a bit of everybody's most important opinion in that final decision. It was quite brilliant. I don't want to talk for too long. I'll get to Madiba later, perhaps.
Ma'am Lindiwe?
Well, I think what they both had in common, one, integrity. Cast iron integrity. They were both very, very principled. And we'll come with examples later. I think another thing is that, well, I knew OR much better than I knew Madiba. Always truthful. no reason to lie. I remember one day in Lusaka, my brother was working for the UN, had done something which some people thought was out of order because he had bought some equipment, non-lethal, but it was destined for the military, our military. And his bosses found out, and he was in trouble. And they decided with Mavuso that maybe we should approach OR on this. They went to OR, he listened, which was one of his qualities, always listened. OR said, well, Stan, thank you very much for what you did for our MK. And when you meet your boss, stay as close to the truth as possible. And that's what happened. He had to divulge what he was doing. The boss was not impressed at all. He was an African from South Africa, but he wasn't impressed. So that's what I remember most about the two of them. I think that one of the qualities we don't talk about when we talk about OR, he was a highly spiritual man. Therefore, he was highly ethical, morally upright. Plenty examples of that. I think there are comrades here all over who can...
Maybe just share one or two of those, because I think the intention tonight also is to really be able to understand their lives through the stories, through the tactile interactions that you had or that people had with them.
I had a daughter that I had to steal out of Swaziland from her father, because when OR had said I should go home to meet my relatives in the frontline states because my mother had passed on, I went there, and the daughter was in very bad shape because of the kind of parenting that was going on. So I decided we steal her. We take her out of Swaziland. And at a later stage, after going to school in Swaziland, I was being assigned to go to Sweden to serve as chief representative. At that time, she already had a scholarship to go to Cuba with other ANC children. We were all very happy about that, except she wasn't impressed at all. She was okay before she knew I was going to Sweden. Once she found out she wanted to come to Sweden with me, I said, no, but I can't. I can't take a teenager to Sweden when I'm going to cover the whole of Scandinavia and leave her at home by herself when I'm running around Scandinavia. And she said, well, if I don't come with you, I'll go back to my father. It hurt me deeply. I think mothers here would understand what it means. I was so upset. So my brother and I decided we must go and talk to OR about that. He listened again, and in the end he said, you are correct, Lindiwe, not wanting to take her to Sweden because you have a huge task ahead of you. I can't see you wanting to leave her in the whatever home you are going to establish there alone in a strange country. Mm. The best thing, let her go back to her father. I still, you can see the expression. That's how I felt. But OR said, he is the father. She wants to go back to him. Let us not deny her the right to her father. So I had to swallow hard. And she went back to her father. The story ends by her then later running away again from the father to come to me in Sweden.
So you got your way after all.
And OR facilitated that as well.
So it was when the time was right. It was when the time was right. Uncle Mac, in the lives of both these two men, what Mam Lindiwe was talking about, the ability to tell the truth, to demonstrate integrity, in the real life of confrontation, negotiation, where telling the truth is also could become life-threatening. What can you tell us of their lives?
I thought Comrade Lindiwe said as far as possible. She didn't say absolute.
Completely, yes.
However, just to come in and try to make this thing a little more lively. Firstly,
I told you he was cheeky.
firstly, let me say, one of my disappointments is that we are not celebrating the 120th anniversary of the composition of Nkosi Sigalel. I don't know why. Be that as may, it is the 120th year. To come to Luli's point about OR and decision-making by consensus, let me say this was not peculiar to OR. It was there even before OR. It was there in the time of Lutuli. It was a tradition that grew up in the ANC, and it continued beyond that. So consensus making as a mechanism of decision making in the ANC should be noted. And it is a very important one because it tries to bring everybody together. And that is one of the hallmarks of the Tambo era. He lived and led at a time when our movement could have disintegrated like so many other movements around the world when they were driven into exile. He had mastered the art of gathering the people as a flock to keep them marching in step, even if that step was not as dramatic as one would have wanted at that time. And he kept us forward. But on the leadership question, I wouldn't like to generalize too much beyond the area of social movement and social change, because that's the only area that I know. In that regard, it is always that what happens, the outcome of what you have decided to do as an organization usually is different. And I believe that leadership arises in the way in which you react to the unintended consequences. It is easy to move where the consequences are what you designed. When you have an unintended consequence, you will find people wanting to look back to blame somebody. But you will also find others who will look not for blaming, they will take what has arisen as given, they will turn that setback as an opportunity for the future, as an opportunity, and they will then point a way forward. And to do that, they take responsibility for those unintended consequences.
Right, so what would be some of those moments then through both their record that exemplifies that?
Well, let's take Mandela. He was already 1 year in prison when he was brought to trial, and the chief document was Operation Maibuya. They were facing the possibility of a death sentence. Mandela had not been there when Operation Maibuya was designed. But he said, I will take blanket responsibility for what we have done as MK, even for things that we did when I was not around. And so, skating on that knife edge, he made the main address. And he took full responsibility for the actions of MK. He didn't sit down and say, why did you do this? This is stupid. You shouldn't have done that. And who did it? So that's his example. Take Tambo. Tambo's strength was that very cautious, very careful, would formulate a thing precisely. And it could be very, very thoughtful. But when we faced a situation of Nkomati, and many began to urge us, frontline states began to say, Mozambique said, we've had to negotiate with South Africa, maybe you better do the same. Tambo looks at this situation and in 1984 appoints a subcommittee headed by Paulo, with Simon Makana, with James Stewart and Tambo. And he says, comrades, study this question, is negotiations feasible? That set in motion a preparation before the issue of negotiations was real. So he laid the building blocks so that if anything was to happen, we must not be caught off guard.
Right, I just want to invite the three of you to remember to speak directly into the microphone. I know this is not the tool of your trade necessarily, but in order to help us with the broadcast, and we want to get the best of what you're saying. Just a quick one before I think about your questions. I think it's a good time for us to begin to take the first round of questions. When you talk about that type of collective responsibility, which effectively was what it was, is it akin, through their own narration and behavior, to the kind of collective responsibility we hear leaders in the ANC today talk about taking when dealing with the various challenges that they have to deal with today?
From my perspective, collective responsibility doesn't absolve you as an individual in that collective. That does not mean that you do not go along with the decision that the collective took. You will implement that decision. But it's when the consequences arise that you will take the lead. The leader emerges in that situation because he or she stands up and says, I take responsibility. And opens the way for the rest in the collective to say, individually, I too take responsibility. So you end up as a collective saying, we all take responsibility. Now, the one who turns around in that situation and says, who to blame? And I would like to blame Trevor for a lot of things. But once you say, you look like that, that's the person that falls away and does not become a leader. And if that person survives as a leader, he becomes a Donald Trump.
Trevor, the statute of limitations has not run out. I'm holding you accountable. All right, let's do a quick show of hands. What I would invite you to do in the interest of brevity and really getting to the point is to quickly identify yourself. A quick question. If you want to make a statement, you're welcome to do so, but no long speeches. Because then I have to do what I do on the radio, and that's just cut you off, which is not nice. It's not nice at all. Okay, there's a hand at the back, and then the gentleman here in front on this side. A question right here in front. Let's get the microphones to those of you who'd like to ask questions, and let's begin at the back. Do you have a microphone there? Has it reached you? All right, just maybe stand up. Okay, let's go ahead.
Mandela is the name. I'd like Comrade Mac just to tell us the situation before Kabwe conference in 1995 and the role OR played in saving the ANC, because at the time the situation was very bad. Particularly about the consultative conference, which the ANC is refusing to have it now. That is one. So, Comrade Mac, if you could do that.
What's your name, sir?
Wandile Zulu.
Thank you. There's a question right here in front. Just raise your hand. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, my name is Isaac Munyela from House of Information Academy. I just want to ask a question based on the panelists about the kind of leadership that they see in our government now. For instance, there is something I alluded in my book titled Personal Prophet Syndrome.
Syndrome?
Personal Prophet Syndrome. So now as I see our leaders, like for instance, I wrote a poem titled Why They Waited. So at the time Mandela passed on, our leaders stood up and flattered all the media platforms and then said, we are going to do excellent work to honor Mandela for the people of South Africa. But my question was, why did they wait for him to die? Because they knew all along what he wanted and then what he emphasized to happen in the society of South Africa. So that's my question. What kind of leadership do we have? That's why they are raising on the personal prophet syndrome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandela. For a moment, I thought it was a real book. And there's a gentleman here in front. Let's get a microphone to him quickly and then park there for now.
I have a microphone.
Go ahead, sir. Here we are,
Sir.
right here in front.
Thank you. My name is Septi Bukula. Just one quick question. Those values, Mama Buza, that you say Utadu or Tambo embodied, how important was it to him that those values permeated the whole of the ANC that he was leading? And perhaps more importantly, was he just living those values, or was he also imparting, teaching them to the rest of the ANC? Because if we look at the ANC today and listening to what you're describing, or most of the ANC, or parts of the ANC, let me not generalize, listening to what you're describing on behalf of Utatu or Tambo, I just see a big disjuncture there.
All right, thank you very much, Seb, for the question. Mamlandiwe, perhaps we can start with Seb's question to you. And don't forget to speak directly. So if you hold it, practice with me like Whitney Houston. You hold it like this. Just don't do that part, but speak straight into it. That will help.
I think he was imparting them by example. He lived what he believed in. He lived what he was teaching his comrades, teaching us. There is a situation when young people arrived in Tanzania. Let me preface this by saying I'm in the process of putting together a book by people who were children under OR. And it's Letters to Uncle OR. I don't know if it's going to be the working title, but so far people are responding well to that. And I'm learning so much more about OR from the writing of these people as children. He was warm. And he was embracing. And he was hugging children. He was talking to them like a father. That's why most of them called him uncle. They did that because they knew this uncle was respected by their own parents. Respect is very important in terms of the values we're talking about. And I think that OR was the man who would give up something for somebody else who didn't have the thing. He was self-sacrificing. He was seeing comrades as comrades and not like he was the president of the ANC. He never approached us as the president. He was a servant among servants. I hope I'm correct. That's my conclusion
Yeah.
from having worked around him all these years. Actually, I'll confess, I never called him president. I used to call him Booty. And whenever he signed letters to me, he would say at the end, Booty.
Oh. Sweet story. Auntie Lulu, do you want to add on to that about whether he lived, as the questioner asked, his values, and whether also he taught those values to those in the organization?
Yes, of course, he was a teacher, a great teacher, and as Mam Lindy said, that he led by example. But there's so many qualities. I just wanted to share one that an interview I had with him, or conversation rather. He couldn't speak easily because he'd had the stroke. And I said to him, you're such an inclusive person, leader, and but I just can't help wondering, you're a deeply committed Christian, and yet you were able to embrace the Communist Party. These atheists, how did you do it? And he couldn't say much, but his face lit up and he said, simple. It was their humanity. That's what they had in common. He said these communists were so dedicated to improving the lives of all the people, and this was what impressed him and felt we could work together. And of course the other qualities, his mind, his fine mind, his consistency, his strategy, his ability to work step by step, which could be a drawback at times, but above all, Mam Lindy, what you said, his integrity, because without integrity, all the other qualities of the leader fall away if the leader isn't trusted.
Do you agree, Uncle Mac, as Lily is saying, that in some ways that need to widely consult could be a drawback, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly? Do you concur with that?
There's always a time to consult and there's always a time to do. And once you've consulted, you better do it. Stop consulting in the middle of doing things. So let's not elevate consultation to an absolute value. Take Mandela. I say he was a resourceful man. For him, when I look back and I remember him, the one word comes to my mind, no maganja. He was going to find a way forward. He was a man of action. But he was not action for action's sake. His action was vested with a vision. And so, in all action, in all change, you need ideas and you need to combine them with action. And that is where these values that we're talking about come into play. Your integrity is something that you have to display in that context. Because unless you vest it with that integrity, your ideas and your actions will not gel together. So I come from a perspective that says the biggest thing that I find is the idea of taking responsibility. That is the biggest thing. If you look at OR's life, and I want to bring in a third person into play, because they are inseparable, and that's Walter Sisulu. Here was Madiba, resourceful. Here was OR, resilient, looking at the long term. Nothing is going to shift him from that goal. And here comes Walter. His humanity, his understanding of human nature, of human personality, gave him the edge when it came to strategy and tactics. And these three, with those three qualities, individual personalities, when working together as a team, they were greater than the sum of the parts. And this is what we need to latch onto when we pose questions of the problems that we face. Walter had an attitude. Everything was a problem, but every problem had a solution. So that's the angle that I think needs to be brought in, because the question has been posed. What about today? How do we guide ourselves? Well, we guide ourselves with ideas to solve the problems, with action that's consonant with our ideas, and responsibility for the consequences when they go wrong.
Right, well, I'm going to challenge you then, and in fact challenge all of our panelists to not, maybe on this point, speak in platitudes, but to speak to the real examples of what we're seeing playing out in our political discourse. Maybe, Uncle Mac, if you want to lead the charge on that, because I think it ties in beautifully with Isaac's question. Oh, now you're deferring. Now you're deferring. I think Lily's looking at you.
I have no problem about that. Let me clarify one thing. When you introduced me, you said I was a businessman. I'm not. I took a small foray into business in 2000 and abandoned it in 2003.
So what are you doing these days?
I loaf.
I loaf.
No, I don't. However, to come back to the challenge, when you talk about the present, and I'm not here to put
can I ask you just to speak into, yeah.
I'm not here to put solutions on the table. I'm here to encourage you to take responsibility. You have to carve the way. My time is up. Your time is coming. Put your actions, put your ideas, put your actions, define the problem, find the solution, act on it, and when it goes wrong, take responsibility. That's the challenge. Because the change that our country needs to go through is incomplete. And it was wrong for us in '94 to buy into the idea that we had a miracle transition. It disempowered us. It made us think that it's all going to come from heaven. We were dealing with undoing 3.5 centuries of oppression and exploitation. And we thought we would overcome racism overnight. Couldn't work like that. So we have challenges, we have to define them and understand that the goal that we have to seek remains there. It is enshrined in the Freedom Charter. We can differ how to do it. But after all those differences, we have to come together and agree what needs to be done and pull together. So that's where I come on the challenges of today. And I believe that that is the lesson of OR. OR in the worst of times kept gathering the forces, kept holding them together. And Walter at all times looked at the team, tried to get the team to work together and tried to make the team grow bigger. Whereas the tendency today in the world in which we live is for the syndrome of the great leader, the one person. And I think that's the mistake.
Do you want to come in as well, Auntie Lily, on the question of the kind of leadership we see in government today?
Well, it seems to me very different from the kind of leadership that Uncle Mac has just described. So, of course, there is OR's comment quite early on, I think in '77, addressing an audience in Luanda when he said, "Comrades, if you think that the struggle is difficult, wait until getting to power." And of course, what happens is that people join the ANC for their own personal benefit and not for the cause. They're not giving themselves entirely just for the cause. They're joining it to see what making deals and so on. And so, you know, these are new challenges, and so we've got a new kind of leadership that is located in a different moral universe, if you like. So, well...
I sense putting it mildly.
All right, I'll stop there, but I just want also that, because I haven't mentioned that Madiba, Robben Island, was also, and Walter Sisulu, you know, they were formed an inclusive leadership, along with others as well, where they were able to get all the different political parties on the island, a whole range of generations for 30 years, and knit them together and ensure that all of the prisoners identified a common enemy. And the common enemy wasn't amongst themselves. It was not even the people, the warders, it was a system. And, you know, I don't think that we're really looking, we're coming up with sort of slogans like white monopoly capital, which of course exists. And yesterday it was quite interesting that one of the ANC actually said, actually it's not white monopoly capital, it's capital, it's monopoly capital. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that Madiba
indicator
would have identified.
Go ahead.
I beg to differ on the experience of Robben Island. The PAC, AZAPO, NFL, Unity Movement, and the ANC never agreed on the common enemy. We agreed on how to deal with the prison authorities when they beat the hell out of us. And the moment things got easy, we disagreed. But politically, we never came to an agreement. We talked. So I think we need to be very careful here. And it's well recorded, because at one time I was chairman. We had a prisoners committee. But that prisoners committee dealt with conditions in prison. And when Mandela signed the petition for release in 1968, it's there in the documents, it's signed, it's in Cello's archives. You will find that all the ANC members in the single cell signed it, and only one non-ANC member signed it, and that's Eddie Daniels. The rest, so that's that part. The rest of it, I have no problem about how we can characterize. I think that what is happening today is that we did not adequately characterize the nature of this phase of the struggle. And it is necessary. And I welcome all the ideas that are being put on the table, even the crazy ones.
Which would be what?
No, I'm not here to make judgment. I'm not a lawyer. I'm here to say, let's have that discourse, but let us have that discourse with civility and respect for each other. That's the key. Because if you don't respect each other's views, if you don't listen to each other, then you will not come to a solution together, and you will not march together. That is the important thing that we have to put on the table. Rather than saying, I just agree with this one on this, this is white monopoly, this is black monopoly, this is this. Let's characterize the thing, but let's allow the viewpoints to prevail. Because let's not proceed from the basis that I know of. Let's proceed from the basis, and this is where, by the way, my experience with Walter was most frustrating. You guys think he was great. You know, his nickname for Walter in the 50s was Allah. We all called him Allah. And every time I went to him in prison in discussions, he would be saying, he'll question, he say, and I would walk away thinking he's agreed with me. No, that's the Kosa, that is a Kosa, He is the quality that Mandela and Tambo had. The one that was isolated by Lindiwe, a listener. And that's different from the one who says, Ndivile. I've heard you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I've agreed with you. So Walter had that quality, and that's the quality we need today. When issues are in contestation, let's hear each other. Let's understand each other even when we disagree, so that when we respond trying to understand the other person's viewpoint and explaining why we disagree. That is how good ideas get born. And that is how you weld a team. South Africa today is in desperate need of that process.
I think using that narrative or using their examples, maybe in a second we can segue into of what practical use that can be to those who are in the movement today, who are finding their way, going in, as the ANC says, into this National Policy Conference with the objective of coming out at the other end united. But the narratives and the discourse over the last couple of days are sending some alarming signals about the state of disarray. You can comment on that just now. But what I want to do very quickly, before we answer the question that was asked right at the beginning by Wandile, is to just check in the room. How many of you are 23 and under? I want to put my hand up, but I just can't get away with it. Same here. I want to get a microphone to the gentleman at the back. I want to get a microphone to you, sir, in your suit, and the gentleman. Okay, since you are really stretching your hand up.
I do notice that those are the hands that went up now as under 23 were singing the Mkonto song.
Okay, and here's here's what I want to put to you. You know, do you have a microphone? Okay, to the gentleman. Put your hand up. Or young man, I should say, at the back. I just want to check, right? We talk about people in our history, and as I said at the beginning, for this not to be romantic or nostalgic, is to really get a sense. Obviously, you have the interest, which is why you're here in this room today. But what your objective was in what you wanted to get out of this evening, and whether in your life these two giants of our political history, whether they feature greatly or to the young people.
Thank you very much. The name is Kamil Ali, Deputy Secretary General of the WITS SRC. I think, importantly, what we need to realize is that there's been as Uncle Mac has so adequately and eloquently pronounced, that we haven't defined this piece of our struggle, because I think to a large extent we've taken on the notion that in '94 our struggle ended. So as young people, what often comes into mind is how our struggle could have ended without having impacted those who needed it the most, and the poorest of the poor in our country. So in emulating, I think many young people have, and I have conversations with my own comrades, often about these things, is to say that we do indeed take lessons from the likes of Tambo and Mandela, because I think it's very evident in the recent uprising among young people and young people in university and tertiary institutions across the country, with the Fees Must Fall movement, to say that there are certain things that haven't been realized yet, and we can't give up. And in trying to embody these great giants, we have stood up and we've said, look, it's time to hold our leaders accountable now. And it's time for them to hear our voices as well as young people.
All right. Thanks for the comment there. That gentleman, you have a microphone? Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Kifen Zamkari. I'm the current SRC president of WITS. I'd like to say I'm covered DSG on the first point. Well, I think there are two submissions I want to make quickly, is to say that I think there's a great deal of lessons to draw from the two leaders. And they are collective because it's not them. It's them and those they led. And I think the most important one is bearing the responsibility of critically analyzing the time they went and having to be decisive with the way forward. Because you would remember they are the ones who charged the initiative of Umkhonto Wesizwe by critically analyzing what was happening. So that's why I said I'm covered by the DSG to say, also as young people, we have critically analyzed what needs to happen and we have taken a stance. That's lesson number one. But I think another thing that we need to embody in ourselves is to understand that we are not struggling in unison, or our struggle is not unique to us as South Africans. They understood that they are not taking a struggle of South Africa, but Africa as a whole. And it's one discourse that is diminishing in us as young people. We need to broaden our politics to understand that there are young people who are suffering worse than we are in Zimbabwe. There are young people suffering worse than we are in the DRC of Congo. When you go to these great places that we speak of in the revolution of South Africa and its emancipation, Lusaka, Luanda, and you just look at what's happening around there, your skin shrinks. And those are things that when we are back here, we forget about. So I'd like to say, as young people, that's a discourse that we must engage in. Understand the politics of Africa, the sufferings of our people in Africa, so that we can know that we have a bigger role to play than fees must fall. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. And then the one straight across in the black jacket, and then we'll shut it down there for now.
Hi, my name is Bongani Masilela. I graduated from WITS today. So, my partners and I run a social enterprise called Simung, which partners with the public sector and private sector. We've worked with, ABSA, the Ekurhuleni Municipality, Department of Education, and so on, to create debating and public speaking programs for young kids. And the goal of that is to sort of optimize intergenerational conversations between kids who are at a school-going age and elders who have some sort of wisdom, because it is the youth who are at most risk of sort of experiencing the perils of bad leadership and bad governance and so on and so on. And so the reason we came to today's event was to find out how to optimize those sort of intergenerational relationships, and especially how to apply them in the programs that we're already running, to make sure that kids as young as 8 and 9 understand fully what the message of Uncle Mac is, whether it's at a debating tournament or public speaking or whatever the case may be. So that's the purpose of us coming here, is how do we sort of take these lessons and optimize them and create active citizens within society.
So congratulations. So is it working for you so far?
It is working. If we could show you our videos. But anyway, it is working because what you find is that a lot of young people, especially the ones that we work with in our programs, we very effectively inculcate, these intergenerational conversations within them, and they very much feel empowered by these programs. And so, I definitely think, it's working. Otherwise, we wouldn't be waking up every day, to
I was actually asking if the conversation was working.
Oh!
But it's okay.
It is.
I got you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, brother. Testing mic, 1, 2. We have an issue there with the microphone. Okay. Let's go ahead.
Sorry about that. My name is Simo Zulu, and I'm going to challenge the panelist, as Mark Maharaj was saying that he's not here to judge, but this question is actually forcing you to judge, or to at least make that attempt. Both Oliver Tambo, in my view, Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela contributed immensely to our advance towards pursuing national unity and reconciliation as a nation. Now, the question I would like to ask is, how far are we as a nation, in your view, as panelists, have we lived up to the foundation and the values set by Oliver Tambo and others with regard to these important foundations as values of national unity and national reconciliation 23 years after our democracy? I'm raising this question because that we shouldn't, even as we shouldn't romanticize values of national unity and national reconciliation, but we need to have an understanding that as we pursue and address the various challenges that we have, these values of national unity and national reconciliation remain fundamentally important for us. And I would like you to reflect or perhaps comment on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those. Great comments, by the way. I'll give you another turn to make some comments and maybe to ask some questions, but Mam Lindiwe, if you want to perhaps start with what the last person said.
Well, let me start by saying that, let me say what I wanted to say about Tambo. Tambo was a builder. You remember he went here out of South Africa with Matlo, sent out by the ANC, and there was no ANC office anywhere outside. He started in Dar es Salaam, collected a few people who gathered from the alliance, built an organization that was global in the end, because he was that, a builder, unified not just ANC, but how did he even unify ANC? I remember in London, I was reading Mrs. Mbeki's article in Oliver Tambo Remembered. She says in London, students, they went to him because they were having a problem. And the problem was that the Africans had formed the youth section of the ANC. But in London, you now have members of the alliance, people from the Congress of Democrats, people from the trade unions, and the youth wanted to work with them. They approached Tambo. He listened, and he said, "Thank you very much for coming up with this novel idea." It was novel for Africans, Indians, white people, black people and white people to be in the organization, the ANC. It's the youth of the ANC that started that. From there you go to Morogoro. Because the precursor was there, Morogoro decides all the other nationalities must be members of the ANC as well. They went members of the ANC prior to Morogoro. We come to Kabwe. The NEC is exclusively African. What happens in Kabwe? Everybody who has leadership qualities can be a member of the NEC. Building all the time. Now look at the international movement, solidarity movement that he amassed, we created around the world. Tambo could identify qualities in the people that he was sending out to the world and followed up on what they were doing and encouraged, because he was a man who knew what needed to be done for his people. He taught the people around him his security. What's the most important thing in your life? The people of South Africa. Every one of them could give you that answer. I think that we need to also remember that he didn't just build people. He built places like Somafco, the school, the Solomon Mahlangu Freedom College. He was answering a need. Children had come out of South Africa in 1976. and countries were offering accommodation and scholarships. But together with the education committee, they decided we need to establish a school for our people, for the young people. Other children, babies were being born in exile. And he took that into account. Let's have a school that accommodates the little ones, the primaries, and the high school. I mean, this man is phenomenal.
So the template is there. What's the missing link for why we can't emulate that today?
The missing link is leadership.
Lily? Mum Lily? Auntie Lily?
No, that's absolutely right. But what's going through my mind, though, is there are some little contradictory things. OR would teach and lead, but he also was so aware of his constituency. For example, he gave an example. In 1959, when he was, this special position was created for him, deputy president, in 1959. So he was democratically elected the deputy president because Chief Lutuli was banned all the time and persecuted, so you needed somebody to step in. And in that 1959 conference, the question was raised by people in, for example, the Congress of Democrats, which, by the way, I was a young member, and I always used to say, why can't I join the ANC? You know, why must I be the Congress of Democrats? And I was put firmly in my place. It was put to the ANC, the Congress of 59, and most of the people said, no, we're going to end up being dominated by non-Africans, which is a familiar discussion now, in a way. OR said, we must never go too far ahead of our constituency. So they left it. And then, of course, it came up again at Morogoro. And it was only at Kabwe that, you know, the time was right. And those non-Africans just had to be patient and carry on with the cause, which was the same as the ANC, but you know, coming from where they came. So that's one example of how he was the leader who really listened, and that's why he was a good leader.
Maybe you can pick up from there, Uncle Mac, and also, I think both of you have touched on Kabwe, but Wandile's question was also on Kabwe and on the need for a consultative conference. Maybe you can start there and then answer the question of our last speaker around whether we've lived up to the values of OR and Madiba.
Well, if I may come in by saying I had occasion in prison, plenty of time, 12 years, to talk with particularly Walter Sisulu and ask him the question. And the three of them shared this view throughout their life, that in order to have a revolution, a social change, you needed the people to be active. But number two, you needed an organization to spearhead that. Otherwise, you'd end up like the Arab Spring in Egypt. Now, that was a wedded thing. They arrived at this as young people. They used to meet at Walter Sisulu's home in Orlando before the formation of the Youth League. Then Dr. Njobozis, Anton Lembede, Madiba, OR, debating these issues. And I say to Chopo, I say, hey, Chopo, all of those guys, MA, doctor, lawyer, mathematician, and you got Standard 4. Didn't you feel disadvantaged? He says, no, I didn't feel disadvantaged. What do you mean disadvantaged? I say, but they had all the jargon and they read all the books. He says, look, man, I knew what we want, what we need. We need an organization. And that's it. Whatever they can say, they cannot bamboozle me from one point. They can contribute to how to make the organization what it should be. So I had no need to feel disadvantaged. Now, from that premise, I would like to respond to some of the comments by saying, when we adopted the Freedom Charter, 3,000 odd people gathered at Kliptown. It then went to each of the constituents of the Congress movement for them to individually adopt it. It then went into a program from 1955 to propagate it amongst the people so that they support it. They didn't say, this is the paper, it's done, finish. They went to mobilize. And they went to translate those goals as being in the interest of the working people, the poor, as well as those who are well-to-do. They went to show that those objectives were of value not just to the African people, but to the colored and to the Indian and even to whites. That was the basis. You went to mobilize and win and build a national consensus. It is easy to think of your own interests, whether as individuals or as a group, as a sector, as a stratum, as a class. But if you want to lead the national struggle, you must take those interests and translate them in a way in which they serve the national interest as well and the interests of others, so that they buy into it. So it's one thing to say we've got the answers. It's another thing to sell it. That's the challenge even the ANC is facing. I still stand with the view that there is no formation in this country that has that promise, that has had that link with the people. But whatever it decides, it will have to go and persuade the rest of the people of South Africa. And if it fails to persuade them, it will fall by the wayside. Now that's the lesson of these two great guys. This builder that Lindy is talking about, he built by drawing in more and more people. This idea of opening up the ANC from an exclusive African organization, stage by stage, to build the alliance with the Communist Party, with the trade unions, was all a search to broaden the range of forces together around those core values that are defined and objectives that are defined in the Freedom Charter.
Well, then what do you make, Uncle Mac, and when you spoke about how the campaign of putting together the Freedom Charter was done, it was really this, going to the length and breadth of the country and canvassing people. In a sense, there are attributes of that in what the expectation of this national policy conference is to be. These are ANC branch members who should be sending up their objectives, their wishes for the party through their branch representatives at the ANC's policy conference. It doesn't seem, the criticism we're hearing is it doesn't seem to find expression there. There's a whole lot happening at branch level. This is something that the ANC says itself in its diagnostic report. You're dealing with the party being pulled in all kinds of directions, an introduction to our lexicon of things like white monopoly capital, radical economic transformation, inclusive growth. There's so many terms. And I know that you're loath to answer the question in this way, what would Tambo and Madiba have done? But using their record, the way they executed their responsibilities, two questions arise. Number one, how would they have led the organization under the current circumstances? And are the challenges the ANC facing right now, today, worse than at any other time in their history?
Let's be very clear. In 1953, Mandela was elected president of the Transvaal ANC. Walter Sisulu was leading a delegation to the Youth Festival and was in China at that time. And a group came up in the ANC called Bafa Bagia. It's my slogan, we die while we're dancing.
Say it again, it sounds good.
Bafa Bagia, we die while we're dancing. They came from partly from the party that had now been banned. Danny Duplessis was there, MacDonald Maseko was there, a number. Walter is in Peking, and he's getting news from Singwa News Agency. Those days it was Telex. Madiba had stood for presidency against a person who had been a member of the Communist Party. But his candidature was supported by J.B. Marx, who was a communist. And he won the elections. And Bafa Bagia began to give him trouble. And Walter reads the telex messages in Beijing. Madiba has just expelled 5 people. The next day, the telex says he's expelled 7. The next day says he's expelled another 10. And Walter says, my God, we're going to be without an organization. Those things happen too. Let's not idolize these 3. They once went together, 3 of them, to bust up a meeting with the Indian Congress and the Communist Party. They had caucused, and they went there to break it up. But during the course of that meeting, the moment OR and Madiba presented the case, Ismail Mir responded, and Walter saw a point, and Ismail was saying, but we've already launched this campaign. Let's not destroy comrades. And Walter began to say, yeah, maybe. And then Ismail praised him more, and Walter began to blow up. And the more Ismail praised him, the more Walter parted from the conspiracy. When they left the meeting, that was at night, they walked to Park Station. OR and Madiba walked on one pavement and they left. So we can have all those fights. We can have all that. But to return to your question, it is the Freedom Charter, if whatever happens at the ANC conference, no matter how well-meaning their policies they adopt, they will have to go and sell it to the people. And in selling it to the people, if it does not meet their interests, they will fail. Straightforward. Straightforward. So you have an opportunity to interrogate it. Now, there's a tradition there, which we inherit from the generation of the Lutulis, the Tambos, the Mandelas, and the Sisulu. And that is that after the ANC has considered as a leader, as a vanguard, it then draws in other people into the process. It draws other formations in civil society. It listens to everybody. And one of the things that you have to do today is whether there are people who are ANC but outside of that policy conference, whether there are people who are not ANC but are making comments, it is the duty of the leader of the revolution, if it is a leader, to take into account all those voices. Because when it goes to sell its policies, it will have it to sell it to those people. Now that's where I come from, and that's what I think is the challenge of today. So don't think if you are not in the ANC, you are meaningless and your voice is of no consequence. It is of consequence. They will have to come to persuade you to support their policy.
Anyone want to support or challenge that narrative? I must bring this around the corner, so I feel almost like a lottery ticket holder. I'm going to take 2 questions from the floor. We've only got a few more minutes, so just 2 questions. Any of the sisters in the house want to ask a question? I don't see the hands. Maybe I've missed you. Anyone? Right, here we go. In the front here, we'll take a question from you. And then we'll come here to the front, since we didn't give the front ticket holders any love this evening. So we'll come to you. And that's where we're going to shut it down and take some final comments from you. Are you guys enjoying the discussion so far? I'm riveted. I think we can do a little bit better than that. Thank you. Okay, let's go.
Hi, my name is Petronella Chingono. I've been hearing a lot about the youth starting the organization of the ANC. do you feel like the current youth of the ANC is doing enough to change what it... Because I feel like they're sitting under a gold mine. They don't know their role. They don't know what they're supposed to do with their role.
Young people need direction, is
Yes.
what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the gentleman right here in front. Maybe just feel moved by the spirit and shout it out.
My name is Fanatia Masaya from Anglican Church. Sis Linda, you've indicated about the spirituality of OR. And I'm with my bishop from... noting the current...
I think let's put it down. We can hear you because it's interfering with the tech, so go ahead.
Noting the current relationship between the SACC specifically and the ANC and the government, and noting the SACC stance and the calling to South Africa, and further noting the ANC's response.
You can see you go to church often.
And arrogancy. What is your comment in view of OR, specifically spirituality, and building the ANC, and with their relationship with the church? What is your comment?
I don't know if I should throw it to our dear friend and sister there, Brigalia Bam, who worked with the World Council of Churches and has loads of experience in that way. But I think that OR worked hard around the world to mobilize the churches, all religions, I should say. He was known to Muslims, to Hindus, to Jewish, to Yiddish people. He was known to Christians of all denominations. And he put them together. And the work he did with the World Council of Churches and their program to combat racism, adopted by all the churches, and OR was there. His representatives were there when Busak was made the president of the World Reformed Movement. This is foreign territory where ANC has difficulties with the churches. I think it's foreign. It's really unknown in terms of the OR teachings and traditions.
Mambrigalia?
I just wanted to add not only about OR, because OR fortunately was a very active Anglican and grew up in that tradition. And so his foundations were a little easier. You know his history, that he went to school, Holy Cross Mission, which was a church school, and then later went to St. Peter's, Rosettenville, which some of you might know, and he has that history. But I think we need to mention that Mandela, although he didn't have that kind of label, was a man who respected all religious groupings. And in all those years he was in Robben Island, you might know that he was in fact in touch with the churches even at that time. Some of you perhaps here might know that there was a powerful organization in this country called the South African Council of Churches. And some of you might know the work of that organization with the rest of the churches around the world. And it was the ANC and other liberation movements who worked with that organization. And so I think that the present leadership of the ANC need to refresh their memories, which I am a bit sad that they have faded so soon. And this relationship continued long after everybody had come back from exile, is that the churches in this country remained very close, not to a particular ideology, but they were committed to issues of justice, and they continue to be so. And they will work and speak in a truthful manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm reminded of the single cells in Robben Island. We used to be locked up and over weekends, and then came the priest, and he used to preach while the doors were closed. We demanded that the corridor doors be opened. Eventually they opened that, but the grills were closed. Then we demanded that that be opened, and there arrived the preacher to preach to us in the corridor. Governor Mbeki remained in his cell. He said, nah. Neville Alexander refused to go. Me, as a communist, I went because I wanted company and I wanted to listen to the singing. But they asked all those who are Anglicans. And Billy Nye shouted, Nelson Mandela. So Madiba had to go to the Anglican service. The following time, a Methodist arrived, and they said, all those who are Methodists, Billy shouted, Mandela. Then came Brother September, independent churches, and they said, all those who belong to Brother September's church, Billy shouted, Nelson Mandela. Madiba says to us at the quarry, hey, chaps, what are you all doing to me? We said, hey, you brought us to jail, now pray to get us out.
Really nice one.
But on a different note, I would like to add another dimension. A thing that I think is a mistake of omission, post-94. Once we ascended to political power, we had the tradition from the 80s. In the mass democratic movement, there grew up the interfaith movement, where Christians, Jews, Hindus, Muslims came together and began to build that unity. Post-94, and although that unity was based primarily on the established religious movements, yet we knew that the overwhelming majority of religious people were in the independent churches. The challenge that we did not address was to play a role in expanding that unity of the churches that came up in the 80s, so that the established and the independent came together. That is the role I think we missed. I'm party to that.
Yeah.
I'm part of that mistake. But I say, in the debates we are having, we need to do that because we're talking about building a nation.
So speaking of party to mistakes, a quick question from the floor, and I know, Auntie Lily, you want to talk about OR very quickly on women, but with the values of the Freedom Charter that you were talking about that are addressing the legacy of apartheid today, we face challenges of having to, we are facing challenges having to address the legacy of apartheid because of the sunset clause. Why did you agree to that? Why did we agree to that? You used the word mistake, so I thought it was opportune.
I can see a number of people here who agreed to the same thing. Yeah? But they're keeping quiet now.
Yeah, well, why don't we can turn the spotlight on them. Who would you like to add? Who would you like to add?
Straightforward. In order to move our country forward, we were at the point and we were clear. Unless we had majority rule, we were prepared to go on fighting and die. And generations had already died. But we were confronted with a conjuncture of circumstances where negotiations became possible. And Mandela from prison in a memorandum encapsulated the goal of negotiations. It was that we have to find a solution based on the principle of majority rule. And he added that there will never be peace in South Africa unless there is majority rule. But he said that will have to be reconciled with the concern of the white minority who control political power and economic power. We will have to reconcile with their fears and concerns. He didn't call those fears and concerns principles. He called them fears and concerns. And he says that is what the negotiations will have to address. And we had to find a way forward on that. And the sunset clauses that came up were a concrete addressing of the fears and concerns. We characterized it, we understood it, we listened as the negotiations went on. As we fought over the table, as we fought in bilaterals, we kept asking, what's their fears? Don't tell us general terms, make it concrete. They were afraid they will lose their constituency, namely the civil servants and the security forces. And we had to say, how do we address that fear? Are we ready to move forward without that? And we said, let's address it, but let's put a time limit to that process. So we put the sunset clauses. That's why we have the word sunset. It's going to set. And we said it'll set in 5 years. I could have the same Director General in the department, but I could have made him a driver provided I gave him the title and I gave him the salary. But he could drive my car.
In hindsight.
That was the deal. But remember this, we had 11 Bantustans, and the House of Delegates and the House of Representatives, each with their DGs. And in uniting this country, we had to bring them all on board. So we ended up with the Education Department, we made it 1, but we had 14 DGs. We were paying 14. But that was the price we had to pay.
Was it worth it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was in the bush. When comrades came to me in the negotiations and said, we go back to the bush, I said, hey, you, I remember you in Lusaka, you had a bandaged ankle when we said go home. You want me to go back into the bush? No, this time you going in, and I'm sitting back, and I'm going to say,
Auntie Lulu, I'm going to allow you to come in quick.
Actually, I was thinking of Mam Lindiwe, because OR played a major role, I know it's a bit of a contradiction because he was a man, in promoting and nurturing and lifting up and giving confidence to the women's movement in the ANC and to the Women's League. And he made a famous speech in '81, I think it was, to the Women's League, where he said, women, help us men. Please help to liberate us. We need your help. And then he gave a famous example, which I'm now going to pass on to Mam Lindiwe to relate.
There's no holding back now, Comrade Bay.
Speak generally.
why not you give us help?
No, let me start by saying ANC comrades everywhere in the world were talking about the threefold oppression of women by nationality, race, and class. I have them all. We said, yes, we do that. All of us, you comrades, were having a meeting with the NEC. The thing was so bad in Lusaka, the women's section decided to ask the NEC for a special meeting on that question. And we said, yes, we agree, threefold oppression. But one is right here inside the ANC. We are subjugated by you male comrades.
And you were looking at me when you said
Fortunately, you were not there, man. The comrades were not amused. OR listened, and Comrade Tambo was already on our side because we had asked him to organize the meeting. And in the end, he asked the comrades, the male comrades one by one, what do you think about what the comrades have just done, coming to us to present this question? they went around the bush. And finally, Comrade OR said, "Thank you, comrades. You saw a problem that we men didn't see because we are men. Thank you for bringing it home rather than taking it out there. You had every right to go on Radio Freedom to talk about it, but you decided to come home." The next thing, we go to Angola. There's a meeting of the ANC women's section. And OR says all those things that Lulu has already said. And then he said, on fear of failing, when she was appointed as a chief representative, Lindiwe Mabuza cried, wept until she collapsed on herself. And then he went on to say, but on record, has any man done better and more? He said that to say, you women are responsible also for your oppression. If you don't get out of this idea that you have to be behind men, we won't let you move forward. It's comfortable to where we are. So no one at that time had promoted the question of the emancipation, total emancipation of women until OR enunciated it at that conference. We're all grateful that we even have gone so far as to have a woman vice deputy president in this country.
And maybe a president, female?
No comments. No comments.
Well, yeah. Okay. Mambrigelia, do you have your microphone still? Okay. I'm coming over. Okay. It was giving me a chance to show off my heels. Sorry, okay, I'll sit back.
I would like to share an experience of what OR did that is related to the women's struggle. I had an idea when I was living and working for World Council of Churches of creating a women's movement externally. And we had a lot of support at that time with many women's groups who were also working on anti-apartheid. And so there was no problem for us. And then so I started, as I was traveling, on the ticket of the World Council of Churches to promote this idea. The ANC women didn't like it very much, and they then reported me for trying to create a women's party, where that ever came in. That was never my idea. I was so busy and I was more interested in women. Anyway, it became a big fight and they organized a meeting in London, a long story. And the ANC mobilized over 60 women to come and break that meeting, which I had called. And one of the persons in this whole war of this movement who was on my side was OR. And OR was trying to say to the women and to the ANC, the head office in London, what is the problem? Because they finally reported me to my boss, Secretary General, Dr. Philip Porter, that I'm forming this movement, which is a breakaway from ANC. Good heavens, a breakaway from ANC. Can you imagine? And this war carried on finally. Then we went to the UN, and I was consulting for the United Nations, and then we got money from many people, and many South African women were coming, not only ANC women, because we had lots of money from women saying, bring women from outside, bring women from South Africa. So and OR thought I was going to be in big trouble with this group in Nairobi. So he decided to come and give me support, which was wonderful that he was giving me support against ANC women, because he thought they might beat me up or do something, I don't know what. And then that evening he arrived with Muchoma, President Muchoma from Namibia, leader, and then OR summoned all of us, including Mampile, Rampela, that we must all sit on the stage with him. I said, ooh, and thinking OR. I couldn't dare. And it was OR in that meeting in 1985 of the United Nations and spoke about the struggle of women in South Africa and why it was important that the women should be part of this new nation that we're all struggling on. And I just want to say it wasn't only referred to ANC women, it was only referred to the women, not only women of South Africa, he talked about the women of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mam Brigelia. The stories have been so delicious. I've almost wanted to kick off my shoes, wrap my feet under me, and get a cup of hot chocolates. Thank you so much for sharing from the heart and so robustly and no holds barred. Of course, we expect nothing less from you, Uncle Mac.
Revenge on one church person.
Yeah, go.
The revered Archbishop Emeritus Tutu. We had a clandestine meeting in South London before the days when open meetings could be held with people from home. Present at the meeting was our Tambo, Mbeki, and myself. And the Arch walked in. And he looked at me, he looked at Tambo, and just as we were starting the meeting, he turned to OR and he said, "Can we pray?" And then he started praying. And me, I'm sneaking a look at Tambo, is his eyes closed or open? And then he's spotting us as he's praying. When the meeting was over, he says, "Is the meeting over?" OR says, "Yes." He says, "Well, can we pray again?"
And I think on that note, all that's left for me to say is a great big amen. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I have to do what?
I'm saying you have to say I'm coming because they're going to be surprised.
Do you want me to?
Yes, that would be better. Because they are leaving.
Just before everyone goes, I'm so sorry, it was remiss of me not to introduce Selo to deliver the final epilogue, so to speak. Selo Hatang.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for these stories that you were sharing. I thought before we kick off, maybe we should not forget the question that was asked by I think the only woman who asked the question tonight. And it would be remiss of us not to at least attempt to respond to a woman's question based on what was said about the role of women. So she asked the question, Ntate Meg Maharaj, she said, the youth of today, do you think they are playing a role?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes. Yes, they are playing a very active role. No, they have not yet translated their interests into the national interests adequately. They still have a way to go. They still have to take what they've got, the energy they've got, the daring they have, and to translate it as something that is in the interest of the entire society.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I thought maybe we should kick off as we close by saying our deepest condolences to the family of Ntate Johnny Mekwa, one of the activists who was a great trumpeter whose passing should not be forgotten. To his family we say, your loss is ours. We must also not forget to pass our condolences to the family of Suna Fenter. I believe, without knowing the detail of what caused her passing, I believe that we might have failed her. The kind of pressure that journalists find themselves in today is something we should all say not in our names. And I think while we debate issues of transformation of the media, we should not lose sight of the constitutional beings that we are as South Africans. And I think that's the thing that all of us must just remember. You can debate about all these things, but at the core of it, it goes back to constitutionalism. And we must remember that journalists have a right to exist, and they have a job too. So as we, on the same note, we should also maybe go back to a couple of things that were said tonight, which are just as important, by Ntate Mek Maharaj, Meluli Kalinikos, Lemme Lindiwe Mabuza. I thought you all kept on referring us back to our values, reminding us that it's not enough to speak them. It's not enough to say them, but they are better lived. That servant leadership is something that we should demand of our leaders. That it's not about positions, but more about how you can serve. That today we're struggling with seeing color, we're struggling with seeing religion before we see humanity. That we must take responsibility, even when decisions didn't go our way. That the individual, and I think Ntate Mek Maharaj, we need to credit you for reminding us that you cannot exonerate yourself of the responsibility, even when you are part of the collective. But I thought I should also refer, because we were saying some things about Madiba and Ntate Tambo, that I thought I should share 3 OR and Madiba moments that we find in the archive. That when Madiba was in prison, he demanded the right to communicate with Ntate Tambo, to be able to exchange views on the liberation struggle with him. And when OR received the Nehru Award in India on his behalf, in 1980, the prison officials called Madiba to the office and showed him the photo. They wouldn't allow him to take it. So when we get out of here, we'd like to hear more of that in Ntate Mek Maharaj. So even though they didn't say yes, he did communicate with Ntate OR, ultimately. Madiba and OR were students, in fact. I thought Brigadier Obama was going to take this one about them being in the Student Christian Association at Fort Hare. And they went around nearby villages on Sunday teaching the Bible. So spirituality right there. And in the archive, we have something that Madiba, we never accuse him of stealing, but that's one moment that we believe that he might have taken something. A hymn book that he took from Robben Island, which clearly says, do not take property of, it's the property of government. And in it, Madiba has notes. Clearly he's engaging with all these priests that he's been asked to go and represent the rest and pray. So he was praying, because there's proof that he was writing some things about the chapters of the Bible. The third moment is Madiba and OR have spent an hour together on a boat on the Nile River in February 1962. This was at a time that OR was leading the ANC in exile, and Madiba was South Africa's most wanted man. And of course, you'll remember that in August of that year, he was then captured. So that last meeting was at the Nile River. I thought these 3 should, if we had any doubt about cementing relationships, that we never do. And that we remind ourselves again, as Ntate Mek Maharaj reminded us, that you must surround yourself with visionary leaders so that you can be one yourself. He said that Madiba was a resourceful man, OR was resilient, and Ntate Sulu was a strategist and a tactician. So how much better than to just surround yourself with people like those who can then help you with that. Let me end off by saying, as we idolize, and again, it's something that was raised tonight, that as we idolize, we must also deal with the contradictions, because the two live in one. So one should not be quick to just praise without realizing that there were flaws too. Madiba himself, writing in the archive again, said he had this regret of unwittingly giving the impression of being a saint while he was in prison. And he says, I never was one, even on the earthly definition of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. So let us keep praising both sides and checking that we know that people can be contradictory. Let me thank the World Tambo Foundation. Auslinda, thank you so much for your leadership and for having helped us pull this thing together. We will continue to work together on the many things that are coming up. The Hansara Foundation for funding the event, the Nelson Mandela Foundation team, Wits School of Governance for hosting us, the speakers, and these veterans were fantastic, you'll agree with me. You can't just say yes. But you should have seen how Iman Rapeti was sweating before this session. I'm not going to tell them what you said. It might put shade on you. So I'd rather just say that you were sweating, saying, how am I going to control these three? And you did it ably, despite the fact that they had their gloves. Thank you very much. Meb Brigelia Bam came to me as she walked in, and she reminded me of Motswana, and sort of said, so you keep calling us on a cold winter night. And I reminded her that it's warmer tonight. We ordered the right weather. But thank you so much to all the veterans for coming out despite it being cold and late. So thank you very much for coming.
I think Botswana Batimana. Before you leave, the Tswanas are like that. There's some refreshments outside. Please join us.